Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole bunch of different sources and pull out the key stuff for you so you get informed quickly without feeling buried.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. So today, we're jumping into a real mix. We've got AI development, code quality, the whole infrastructure for AI agents.
Which is moving so fast.
Totally. Then there's labor stuff, strikes, sustainability, even how the web itself might be changing.
We've looked at research papers, news articles, blogs. Quite the variety.
Right. And the mission, as always, is to kind of connect these dots, find the surprising links, and give you knowledge that, actually helps you understand what's going on.
Absolutely. It's amazing how things like AI ethics and, say, luxury goods counterfeiting can actually have common threads when you look closely. We want to highlight those connections for you.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with AI. Seems like the place to begin. We have this research paper, an empirical study on the impact of gender diversity on code quality in AI systems. Sounds pretty important.
It really is. Basically, the researchers looked into open source AI projects on GitHub. They used a tool, Gender Computer, to get an idea of the gender of contributors.
Okay.
And they said the tool's pretty accurate, but they also, manually double-checked a sample just to be sure.
Right. Thorough. So how did they actually define a diverse team for this study?
It was a fairly simple binary approach for this particular analysis. If a project repository had at least one female contributor, they marked it as diverse. If it was all male or theoretically all female, it was non-diverse.
That's it.
And they also used the Blau index, which is a standard way to measure diversity, but they adapted it for this binary split.
Okay, so what did they find? Did it actually make a difference to the code having women involved?
Yeah, significantly. This was, I think, one of the main takeaways, and they talked about it in their FSE Companion 25 paper write-up. Even though women might have written a smaller percentage of the total code, the quality of the code they did write was consistently higher.
Higher quality. How did they measure that?
They looked at things like cyclomatic complexity. That's basically how many different paths there are through the code. Lower is generally better.
Right.
And cognitive complexity, like how hard is it for a human to actually read and understand it? Again, lower scores there. They also found fewer code smells. Those are like little warning signs in the code.
Yeah, potential problems waiting to happen.
Exactly. And a lower code-to-comment ratio, which suggests the code was maybe clearer on its own.
Wow. So maybe less quantity, but better quality. That's a really interesting finding for anyone building AI.
It is. And the paper also mentioned something else. Diverse teams, the ones with at least one woman, they tended to manage larger projects overall.
Really? Larger?
Yeah, more code files, more lines of code, more modules. It seems diversity correlated with tackling bigger, maybe more complex systems.
And what about documentation? That's always crucial, especially in big projects.
Good point. They found that too. The re-edit files in these diverse repositories tended to be more structured, with clearer headings, code blocks, links, stuff that makes it easier for others to understand and use the project.
Which suggests maybe a higher priority on communication and collaboration.
Seems likely. And that ties into another finding they highlighted, which I thought was really telling. They looked at community engagement.
Oh, interesting. Like how popular the projects were.
Yeah, exactly. The diverse AI repositories tended to get more stars on GitHub, more forks, people copying the code, and even more issues reported.
So more people were interacting with them, using them, contributing back.
Seems that way. It could be that the higher quality and better documentation just made these projects more attractive and easier for the open source community to engage with.
So the big picture here is diversity isn't just a nice to have or an ethical point. It actually seems to lead to tangibly better, more reliable, maybe more useful AI systems.
That's precisely the conclusion the researchers drew. They really emphasized this idea of a socio-technical imperative for diversity in AI. It's not just social. It affects the tech itself, potentially reducing bias and improving trust.
Of course, no study is perfect. Did they mention any limitations?
They did, yeah. They pointed out they mostly looked at academic repositories on GitHub, so maybe things are different in, say, big corporate settings or purely volunteer projects.
Okay.
Also, most of the code was Python, which is super common in AI, but, results might differ for other languages. And finally, they acknowledged the binary gender approach doesn't capture everyone, and future work could look at that more nuancedly.
Right. Right. Important context.
Okay.
Let's shift gears a bit. We've got a couple of articles here from the New Stack looking at the infrastructure side of AI, specifically AI agents. Things are moving incredibly fast there.
Oh, absolutely. The first one, A2A, MCP, Kafka, and Flink the New Stack for AI agents, it paints this picture of the current AI agent world as being kind of siloed, right? Like the early web before standards really took hold.
Yeah, lots of cool individual agents, but they don't talk to each other very well yet. So what's this new stack they're proposing?
Okay, so they break it down into a few key layers or technologies. First up is Google's agent-to-agent protocol, or A2A. Think of that as the basic language agents use to find and talk to each other.
Like a common tongue for AI agents.
Pretty much. Then there's Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, MCP. That's more about standardizing how agents use tools and access external information, interacting with the world outside their own model.
Okay, so A2A is how they talk, MCP is how they act or get info.
Exactly. But the article makes a really crucial point. Just having these protocols isn't enough. You need robust infrastructure underneath.
Right, otherwise it's chaos when things scale up.
Precisely. And that's where things like Apache Kafka and Apache Flink come in. Kafka is described as this event-driven communication fabric. It's basically a super reliable way for agents to send messages and data back and forth without being tightly coupled. It's already used everywhere in industry for real-time data.
Like a central nervous system for the agent ecosystem.
That's a good way to think of it. A highly efficient messaging backbone. And then Flink. Apache Flink is a real-time processing engine.
So what does Flink do with all those messages flowing through Kafka?
So, as the New Stack analysis lays it out, Flink sits there and processes those streams of agent activity in real time. It can enrich the data, monitor what's happening, trigger actions based on patterns. It adds the intelligence layer on top of the message flow.
Okay, so Kafka handles the flow, Flink processes the flow.
You got it. The article uses this analogy. Imagine a company trying to run just on everyone sending direct messages to each other. It wouldn't scale.
That's a miss.
Yeah. So the stack A2A for speaking, MCP for acting, Kafka for message flow, Flink for processing offers a much more scalable, resilient, and observable way to build these complex agent systems. They even mention this broader four-layer view. Protocols at the bottom, then frameworks like LangGraph or Crew AI for building agents,
Right.
then the messaging layer with Kafka, and finally real-time computation with Flink on top.
It paints a picture of a much more connected, collaborative future for AI agents. Which leads nicely into this other piece, how AI agents will change the web for users and developers. This one digs into the impact on the internet itself.
Right, this features insights from Jeremiah Ouyang. He's an AI investor, founder of Llama Lounge, invested in Crew AI, actually. And he has this pretty bold prediction. AI agents are going to, quote, swarm the web.
Swarm the web. That sounds dramatic. What does he mean?
He envisions agents basically browsing the web for us. They'd go out, hit various sites, pull the specific info we need, and then reassemble it for us, maybe in a totally different interface or app.
So a lot of website traffic might not be humans anymore, but these agents gathering data.
That's the idea. It implies this decoupling of the website's content, the actual data, from how it's presented visually.
Which means websites will need to be structured differently, maybe more like APIs.
Exactly. Ouyang suggests the data layer becomes much more important than the visual layer for these agents. He also talks about new business models, like maybe agents making microtransactions using stablecoins to pay for specific pieces of content they access.
Whoa, so instead of ads based on human eyeballs, you'd get tiny payments from agent visits. That's
Yeah.
a fundamental shift.
Huge shift. Jeremiah Ouyang, in that New Stack piece, suggests humans will still go to engaging sites for news, entertainment, community, but the more informational, laborious tasks, like comparing prices across 50 sites, agents will handle that.
Makes sense. So what does this mean for people who build and run websites?
Well, Ouyang argues websites become even more critical as the information source for these agents, but they'll need those AI agent APIs we talked about, clean interfaces for agents to interact with. He sees big opportunities there for developers building those APIs and creating experiences that work for both humans and their agents.
It sounds like the web could be in for a really profound change, driven by these agents. The article mentions Google's Project Mariner, too.
Yeah, that uses Gemini 2.0, right? It's an example of big tech already thinking about embedding these agent-like capabilities directly into browsers to help users navigate this evolving web.
Okay, so with AI potentially doing more and more, where does that leave us humans? This brings us to Stephen Levy's commencement speech at Temple, which Wired wrote about in No Graduate's AI Hasn't Ended Your Career Before It Starts. He seems pretty optimistic.
He really is. His core message is basically AI can't be human. That fundamental human connection, empathy, creativity, that's our unique, enduring advantage.
He even sort of acknowledges students probably used LLMs for papers.
Right. He doesn't shy away from that, but he strongly warns against letting it replace your own thinking and work.
So what's the key difference he sees?
He talks about AGI, artificial general intelligence, but he makes this great distinction. Liberal arts grads, he says, are learning to think as accomplished humans. AI is trying to think like them. It's a subtle but massive difference.
That's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
He mentioned Google realizing they needed liberal arts majors, didn't he?
Yeah, that anecdote about Google initially resisting non-CS hires, then realizing they were missing out on crucial skills like communication, critical thinking, managing people, it really backs up his point.
And even the president of Anthropic, a major AI company, was an English major.
Exactly. It shows those humanities skills are incredibly valuable, maybe even more so now. Levy argues that stuff created by humans has this authenticity, this connection that AI just can't replicate. He mentioned research showing people value human-created stuff more.
So, as Stephen Levy put it in that Wired piece, based on his speech, the advice is lean into your humanity. Curiosity, compassion, humor.
That's it. Use AI as your assistant, your tool, but don't lose sight of what makes you human. He's optimistic that even if some jobs change, new ones will emerge that specifically require those human qualities AI lacks.
Right, it's about augmenting ourselves, not replacing ourselves. Okay, let's switch tracks slightly, but still thinking about human factors, specifically trust. Got a couple pieces looking at trust in maybe unexpected places, side hustles and luxury goods.
Yeah. First is this Q&A piece from Morning Brew, What If My Side Hustle is Actually a Scheme? It features Bridget Reid, who wrote a book about pyramid schemes and MLMs, multi-level marketing.
Ah, MLMs. They often tap into that desire for extra income, right? Especially when the economy's shaky.
Exactly. And Bridget Reid, in that Morning Brew interview, talks about how they often frame joining an MLM not just as making money, but as, like, empowerment, taking control, being your own boss, especially for people who might feel marginalized economically.
That's a powerful narrative. How do people get drawn in?
She points out it's often through personal connections, friends, family, and seeing the apparent success of people already in it. Plus, you often see supplements involved, right? There's this whole rhetoric of self-improvement tied to the products.
Right. Buy our stuff, sell our stuff, become a better you.
Pretty much. And the article digs into that really tricky question. Can an MLM ever really be legitimate given how the structure usually works where most people at the bottom make very little, if anything?
A tough question with no easy answers, it seems. Okay, now for a totally different world, but still about trust luxury goods. This is from a Business of Fashion podcast summary, The Debrief TikTok Tariffs and Luxury's Fake News Problem.
Yeah, this explores a story that's apparently been doing the rounds on TikTok. The idea that luxury bags and those really convincing fakes, the super fakes, are actually made in the same factories.
Seriously, is there any truth to that?
Well, the expert on the podcast, Sarah Kent from Both, is highly skeptical. She thinks it's extremely unlikely. But the narrative is powerful because it taps into existing consumer doubts.
Doubts about what? Like, are these bags really worth thousands of dollars?
Exactly. Doubts about inflated pricing, maybe questions about whether quality is always as high as it used to be, and a general lack of transparency in luxury supply chains. So, as Sarah Kent discussed on that Both Debrief podcast, even if the TikTok claims are bogus, they resonate because people already have these suspicions.
And manufacturing has shifted globally, right? It's not all done in Italy or France anymore.
Right. High-end manufacturing happens in many places now, China, Cambodia, Vietnam for certain products. Kent argues it's highly improbable a factory making bags for a huge luxury brand would risk that relationship by churning out fakes on the side and bragging about it on TikTok.
Yeah, that seems like a bad business move.
But because the industry can be quite opaque, these stories gain traction. It damages the brands because their whole appeal is built on quality, exclusivity, maybe a bit of mystique. This narrative directly attacks that.
So the takeaway is that luxury brands maybe need to be more open about where things are made and why they cost what they do.
Seems like it. Relying on mystique alone isn't working as well anymore. They need to actively justify the price and value to combat this kind of fake news and rebuild trust. Silence isn't really an option.
Okay, interesting parallels there around trust and transparency. Let's zoom out now to the wider economy and labor. We saw that Morning Brew piece. Are we in for another hot strike summer? What's happening there?
Well, it highlights a couple of recent situations. There was the NJ Transit strike, first one since '83, apparently. Engineers wanted pay parity with LIRR and Metro North workers. Big impact on commuters there.
Yeah, I bet. And the other one.
Starbucks workers. They've had ongoing actions, but this piece mentions strikes related to new dress code rules requiring baristas to buy more of their uniform alongside the continuing demands for better pay and staffing.
So different scales, different specific issues, but both about fair treatment and compensation.
Pretty much. As Morning Brew reported on these recent actions, it does feel like workers in various sectors are more willing to push back right now on things they see as unfair, whether it's pay or working conditions or even uniform policies.
And how's the overall job picture, especially in tech? We have this tech layoffs update, May 2025, from Fast Company, still seeing cuts.
Yeah, it's still happening. According to Fast Company's reporting, companies like Panasonic, Match Group, Google, CrowdStrike, Symbotic all announced layoffs in May.
What are the reasons they're giving?
Kind of the usual mix you hear: restructuring, refocusing on growth areas, especially AI, trying to speed up product development.
Right. What are the overall numbers looking like for 2025 so far?
Layoffs.ffi tracked over 52,000 tech job losses by May, which is obviously a lot of people affected. But the article does point out that number is actually lower than what we saw in the peak layoff years of 2022, 23, 24.
So maybe slowing down a bit compared to the last couple of years.
Seems like it. Still significant, but perhaps less intense than before.
Okay. And one more economic piece, this briefing from Business of Fashion. This week, Liberation Day's long tail. It mentions retail earnings and tariffs.
Yeah, the Business of Fashion's week ahead briefing touched on tariffs. We're apparently nearing the halfway point of the Trump administration's pause on some tariffs. There's some expectation that more countries might reach deals to lower them, like the UK and China did.
But it's still uncertain.
Very. And that uncertainty creates headaches for retailers trying to plan their holiday season orders right now. They don't know exactly what the tariff situation will be, which adds volatility.
Yeah, another layer of complexity for businesses trying to manage costs and pricing.
Absolutely, especially when they're already dealing with changing consumer habits and pressure on prices.
Okay, let's shift now to sustainability. We've got two pieces from High Country News. The first one, behavior change is society change. Sounds pretty fundamental.
It is. It starts with this really striking historical tidbit. Back in 1968, the American Petroleum Institute commissioned a study that actually warned about the dangers of CO2.
Seriously, 1968.
And then apparently the study was suppressed.
Wow. Okay, so what's the main thrust of the article now?
It focuses on how powerful leadership and social influence are in getting people to adopt more sustainable habits. As Rosandra Greedy explored in that High Country News piece, there was a study in Nature showing that when politicians or celebrities visibly make low-carbon choices,
Like flying less or driving an EV.
exactly, it significantly boosts the public's willingness to do the same. Even things like joining boycotts. Visible examples matter.
So it's not just about telling people facts, it's about seeing others act. Role models.
That seems to be a huge part of it. And another study from 2023 found that social comparison, basically, seeing what your neighbors are doing, was the strongest motivator for lasting behavior change. More powerful than just getting information.
Interesting, like, oh, the Smiths got solar panels, maybe we should too.
Precisely. The article mentions positive examples, like Tucson's mayor prioritizing climate resilience, which inspires residents. And it notes that even in places like Wyoming, which you might think of as conservative, the governor is promoting wind and solar.
So the potential is there if the leadership and social cues align.
That's the argument. Systemic change is possible, but it needs that leadership, contrasting sharply with, the oil industry's past actions mentioned at the start.
Okay, now the second High Country News piece looks at a specific challenge. Is sustainable tourism possible? Focuses on Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Yeah, the challenges of balancing tourism and sustainability really come through in this article on Jackson Hole. It's a classic example of a place becoming almost too popular over tourism.
Right. Tourism brings in money, what is it, $1.7 billion in spending there in 2023. Huge economic driver.
Massive.
Yeah.
Supports thousands of jobs. But the locals are feeling the strain over crowding, traffic, environmental impacts. So they developed this Sustainable Destination Management Plan, the SDMP.
What's in the plan?
Things like boosting public transport, trying to address affordable housing for workers, educating tourists about wildlife and trails, maintaining the trails, practical steps.
But is it working? Is there pushback?
Well, there's criticism that the tourism board still spends a ton of money on marketing to attract more visitors, which seems counterproductive if you're worried about overcrowding.
Kind of cancels itself out.
Potentially, yeah.
Huh.
And interestingly, a survey back in 2022 found most locals would actually pay more taxes if it meant fewer tourists. That says a lot about the impact on their quality of life.
So the tourism board is trying to shift messaging towards stewardship, but it's a real tension.
Huge tension. It highlights just how hard it is to find that sweet spot for truly sustainable tourism that benefits the economy without harming the environment or the local community. It's not just about visitor numbers anymore.
Definitely a complex balancing act. Okay, let's turn to some specific tech innovations now. Quick mention of OpenAI having announcements. Always something happening there.
Right, that Wired piece touched on the constant stream of AI news. But we have details on Codium's new models from their blog post, SWE1, Our First Frontier Models 1. What's SWE1 about?
So Codium's announcement, detailed on their blog, positions SWE1 as models optimized for the whole software engineering process, not just coding. Their big goal, accelerate development by 99%. Ambitious.
99%. Wow. How do they aim to do that? What's different from regular coding assistants?
They argue most assistants focus too narrowly on just writing code in the editor. But real developers, they're using the terminal, searching the web, testing things, dealing with feedback. It's a whole workflow.
Right? It's much broader. It often involves incomplete information or long-running tasks.
Exactly. So SWE1 is designed to handle that complexity. They even developed special benchmarks, conversational and end-to-end SWE task benchmarks to test these broader capabilities.
And how does it stack up against other models?
Codium believes SWE1 is competitive with the big frontier models from top labs and better than current open-weight options for these specific software engineering tasks. They mentioned doing production experiments using a metric called cascade contribution rate, showing good results with their users. There are smaller versions too, SWE1 Lite and Mini Mini.
What's the tech behind it? How does it manage the whole workflow?
A key part is what they call their flow-aware system, working with their editor, Windsurf. It's designed to understand the context of the entire software development timeline, what's happening in the editor, the terminal, even UI previews. This deep context is what they think gives SWE1 its edge. So it's not just code completion, it understands the whole process. That sounds genuinely useful for developers. Okay, what about Meta AI? They had some announcements too.
Yeah, Meta AI recently shared some interesting breakthroughs, as highlighted in their research update. Covers things from molecular prediction to language and neuroscience.
Okay, what are the highlights there?
Well, they released Open Molecules 2025, OMOL 25, and something called the Universal Model for Atoms, UMA. These are AI models designed to speed up the discovery of new molecules and materials.
Which could be huge for things like medicine, batteries, climate solutions.
Exactly. Basically using AI to predict how atoms and molecules will behave, potentially cutting down research time dramatically.
What else?
They talked about a technique called adjoint sampling for generative modeling that doesn't need lots of training data, which could be useful in niche areas. And they shared results from a big study on how the human brain develops language, finding some intriguing parallels with how large language models learn.
Fascinating. Seeing connections between AI learning and human brain development, the pace of discovery is just relentless.
It really is. From tools for coders to models for scientists and insights into our own brains.
Now, thinking about coders again, with AI getting better, how do you even interview people for technical roles anymore? We saw this interesting article about HelloBetter and how they redesigned their interview process specifically to deal with AI cheating.
Oh yeah, HelloBetter's approach outlined in that engineering leadership newsletter is really smart. They acknowledge that standard methods like leak code or take-home tests are flawed, they take lots of candidate time, might not reflect real work, and are super easy to cheat on with AI now.
The example of someone using AI to change their face and feed them answers in real time, that's kind of terrifying for hiring managers.
Right. So HelloBetter created this new process, the McDougall method, to mirror actual work and be fairer.
Okay, so how does the McDougall method work?
It starts with the usual intro and background chat, but the core is a pairing exercise on a real local code base. The candidate gets to see a small part of a private repo beforehand. Then they work with the interviewer on it.
Okay, pairing. But what about the AI?
Here's the key part. They explicitly allow and even encourage candidates to use AI tools during the exercise.
Really? They want them to use AI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The logic is, if engineers use AI on the job to be productive, Why wouldn't you assess how they use it during the interview? It shifts the focus.
So you're not testing if they can code without AI, but how they leverage AI as part of their workflow and their understanding.
Exactly. They follow up with questions about the choices made, the reasoning, understanding the code, not just did it work. The goal is to level the candidate, figure out their strengths as an implementer versus a knowledge holder rather than just pass-fail.
That makes so much sense. What benefits are they seeing?
They report faster hiring, much lower chance of cheating, obviously, and a better, more nuanced assessment of skills relevant to the actual job.
That's a really practical example of adapting hiring to the AI era. It forces you to think about what skills really matter now.
Definitely raises that bigger question, yeah.
Okay, nearly there.
Ah.
Just a couple of quick practical hits to finish. One from Wired On, saving browser battery life, always useful.
Ah, yes, the eternal struggle. That Wired article had some good tips.
What were the main ones? Easy wins.
Using the built-in energy saver modes in Chrome, Edge, Opera, they limit background stuff. Managing tabs is key, snoozing inactive one, which most browsers can do now, or just keeping fewer open. Using tab manager extensions helps too.
Makes sense. Less stuff running, less power used.
And they also mentioned dark mode. Switching to dark themes can save a bit of battery, especially on OLED screens.
Good tips. Okay, last one. A newsletter piece reflecting on happiness and the commodification of poetry. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, this was a more philosophical one called Is to Categorize Happiness, to compare it to Scare It Away. It mused on how trying to measure or quantify happiness might actually, make it harder to experience.
Like pinning a butterfly.
Kind of, yeah. And then it pivoted to talk about seeing merchandise t-shirts, tote bags featuring lines from Mary Oliver's poetry.
Oh, interesting. Like, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life on a coffee mug?
Exactly that kind of thing. The author talked about feeling conflicted, loving the poetry, but feeling weird about it being turned into products. Does it dilute the meaning when it's on a baseball cap?
That's a really good question. Where is the line between appreciation and commercialization?
Right. The piece wondered if we're losing the ability to just admire something meaningful without needing to buy a version of it, suggesting maybe everything we value eventually gets commodified, and buying the merch becomes how we show our appreciation.
A thoughtful point about how we interact with art and meaning in a consumer culture. It definitely makes you think.
It does, about the difference between really valuing something and just consuming it.
Well, that was quite the journey. From AI code quality and agent infrastructure, through labor strikes, tariffs, sustainability efforts, innovative hiring, saving battery, and reflecting on poetry merch.
It really shows how connected everything is, doesn't it? Technology, the economy, our environment, even our personal experiences and values.
Absolutely. Looking at all these sources together really does give you a richer picture of the forces shaping things right now.
Hopefully, for you listening, it helps connect some dots too.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. As AI becomes more and more woven into everything, how do we make sure we're using it well? How do we leverage its power while actively protecting and valuing those essential human skills, sticking to our ethics, and nurturing the real connections that ultimately make life meaningful?
Something to definitely keep thinking about. We encourage you to check out the sources if anything sparked your interest, and consider how these big trends might play out in your own world.